Awesome.
Well, hey, it's my pleasure today to be with Dr. David and Jane Schooler. They began their journey in the foster care and adoption world a number of years ago, and I'm actually going to ask them to share a little bit of that background. Much of their current focus and work is spent on things like training in trauma and parenting and working with adults who have a lifetime impact of early childhood trauma. Both David and Jane are recognized nationally and internationally, and most recently are working on a new book and are co-directors of the Community Impact Center in Dayton, Ohio, which will be one of the first of its kind trauma training centers launched out of a local church. So, Schoolers, thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with us today.
Thank you for asking. It's our privilege.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
what an honor, Jason, to be asked. Thank you.
Well, I know that so many in the CAFO community have benefited and been blessed by your work. And so I know that they'll be excited to get a little bit behind the scenes with maybe someone that they've seen from a distance on a stage or read in a book or seen in a training. And so I want to start with this kind of a personal question, if you don't mind. Many years ago, I understand there was a simple question that was asked of you by a youth in your church that kind of propelled you into this world that you now spend so much of your time in. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Yes. I was pastoring in Branson, Missouri, and after church, I was, as was my custom, standing in the back, and a young man walked up to me and asked me if I would be his foster parent. His previous foster parent system had to be changed. That he was coming out of that, and so we just said yes. We didn't know any better, didn't know what that meant, but it opened the door to foster adoption and that sort of thing. You never know how God is going to direct us. That's why we have to pay attention. So that was the beginning. That was back in the late 70s.
Yeah,
Jason?
actually 78, maybe?
Or something like that.
78, yes.
So it's kind of started our journey in this way.
Yeah.
It's amazing how one question, Jason, I used to say it changed the course of our lives, but I think it put us on the course God intended.
Yeah,
it's good. And I love how you say, we didn't know any better, so we said yes. You know, I know a lot of parents in hindsight could probably relate to that.
Sure.
We said yes, having no idea what would, the good and the hard, of course, that would come from that. And so
and it's both.
Yeah, for sure. So you've both been authors and contributors into several works and several books, and I know you're working on one now for churches and trauma, and we'll actually get to that here in a minute. But I want to ask you maybe an interesting question. If you had to pick one, if someone came to you and said, we're going to do away with all the books and different things that you've authored and co-authored and been a part of, if you had to say, you know what, if we could just hold on to this one, this is my favorite, this is what I feel like is the most impactful or meaningful for us and maybe for those who are serving, what would you say is it and why?
Boy, Jason, that's a hard question because there's so many. I think aside from obviously the connected child, which in the whole work of Karen Purvis was life transforming for both of us. I think, other than scriptures, of course, too, Childhood Disrupted for me was a life changer. I began to understand really, and it was a compassion growing thing for me for birth parents and the generational causes of trauma. It's by Donna Jackson Nakasawa. And it's an amazing, amazing book about adverse childhood experiences, the long-term trajectory. It builds compassion. It built a lot of compassion into me.
And I guess I would say Gordon Neufeld, who is a behavioral psychologist in Canada, I read his book and it was literally transformational. And now the thing about the book Jane mentioned, the book I mentioned, is the authors are not believers. And many perhaps might discount that because of that. but their truth is consistent with what we know to be true with Scripture.
Right.
And that's very encouraging. We're not against psychology or other disciplines. We are in agreement with them, or they're in agreement with the Scripture, let's say.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
And Dr. Neufeld's book is Hold On to Your Kids.
Hold on to your kids.
Again, that was actually introduced, Jason, to us. We were working in Ukraine, and a Ukrainian Russian speaking social worker said, have you seen this book? And it was in English, obviously in English.
Hmm.
And I said, no. And so that, just God hands you things all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Beautiful. And I know that you and I, we've had conversations apart from this on how so much of what we read in psychology, even if it's written by a non-believer, so many have done deep, deep research on things of the brain and psychology and trauma
Right.
that we can read and find simply affirms what Scripture has said about God's design.
That's good
Absolutely.
news.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. So throughout this series, we're focusing on areas of this journey that might require us to reframe the way that we think about certain things, certain experiences, or certain perspectives. Perhaps we're not seeing it clearly as foster and adoptive parents, or we're not necessarily viewing it from God's perspective. And so in your experience, what's an area of the foster care and adoption journey that you have found many parents must learn how to reframe their thinking on, not just to survive the journey, but really, truly, authentically to thrive on this journey?
I know what you're going to say.
What?
Go ahead.
Well,
I think we're going to say the same thing.
absolutely. Everything in life comes back down to a simple thing, and that is our belief system. And if our belief system is expecting something that is not really reality based, it's going to lead to depression, discouragement, all kinds of bad things. And we absolutely have to have a safe or a accurate belief system about what we're doing and why we're doing it and what to expect. And, and many, many people enter this, as you well know, with a belief system or expectation is going to be this and it's going to be that. When it's not, it creates a personal crisis, and that becomes a problem.
Yeah. And Jason, if anything would be helpful to you, I can send it to you, but we've created 10 common expectations for foster and adoptive parents that if you don't talk about these and get a good handle on these, they really can impact you. And really, two of them, if we have time, that we looked at was one of the expectations: I will not do to this child what was done to me. I have a history of abuse. I will do for this child what was not done for me. I have a history of neglect. In one particular study, 80% of foster parents at orientation said that didn't apply to them. And then after they went through a trauma-informed pre-service, that 80% dropped down to 37. They said, whoa, I didn't know this applied to me. And so it was really impactful to think about those kind of expectations.
And when I interview ones who are thinking about fostering or adopting, I try to probe, why are you doing this? What's the motivation behind it?
Right.
Because if the motivation is not healthy, then it's not going to work out real well.
That's good. So two particular areas you've already highlighted, and we'll definitely love to grab that document from you, and we'll do our best to link to it in the comments below for those of you who are watching this. But you've already highlighted the idea of expectations. What do we expect to get out of this or kind of produce out of this? And then motivations, which is kind of the beginning and the end, right? Like what's motivating us on the front end and what are the expectations on the back end?
Yeah.
And of course, there's so much sandwiched in there in the middle. And one of those things that's sandwiched there in the middle, and really it's the beginning and the end and the middle, but it never really goes away, is this idea that I've never met a foster or adoptive parent who says, I have everything that it takes to fix whatever that means, or to heal, or to bring wholeness. And so I just kind of want to level the playing field for all those who are watching who might feel like, I don't know that I really have what it takes. And I feel like maybe I'm alone in that. The reality is I've never met a foster or adoptive parent who struts in the room and says, I got this, right? And so what would you say to the parent right now in that moment who feels like, I just don't know if I have what it takes to solve all these problems, or to fix what I want to fix, or to bring healing, or frankly, to continue on this journey? What would you say to them in that moment?
One of the things, Jason, I always say when I train foster and adoptive parents, I usually say three things, and I hope I can remember all three of them. That the first one, that you have to have a mind that's willing to learn. If you're not willing to learn, and if you come and say, well, I've been a parent, I know how to do this. The second thing, you've got to have a soft heart that's willing to learn about compassion. And the third thing is you got to have a sense of humor, because sometimes we think we take things far too seriously. So if we come with say, I don't know how to do this, I don't know what I don't know, but I have that mind that's willing to learn. I've got a heart that is open for compassion, and I can look at things with a sense of humor.
We got to have a community.
Mhm.
We can't do this by ourselves. What I know, I can help. They know they can help me. It has to be that community, the body of Christ, working with each other.
You know Harold and Wendy Parks well, and Harold's PhD dissertation was on the resilience of Christian adopted families. He found in that his dissertation that resilience came from community. It came from connection. And so I think that's really key.
And one of the key phrases in the New Testament is one another. Pray for one another, exhort one another, encourage one another. If that system's not working, then there's going to be some lack.
Yeah, for sure. You've written and taught extensively on parenting, trauma, connection, and healing. And I need to actually source this. I always quote him, and I might be misquoting him, but I think that maybe the quote is attributed to Mike Tyson, who I think at one point said, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face, right? And
Oh, yes.
and then suddenly the plan goes out the window and you're scrambling. What would you say to the parent who's trying all the techniques and all the strategies of parenting and trauma? And you've already mentioned Dr. Karen Purvis and the Connected Child, and just, I'm trying all of these things, but I feel like I just keep getting punched in the face, and my plan goes out the window in that moment, and I don't know what to do.
That's a great question, because it's going to happen in vast majority of cases. It's not what we expected. I'm doing everything I know to do, but yet he keeps, or she keeps coming back at me with all of these assaults and so forth. It is an absolutely critical piece to deal with. And I have come to the conclusion as a pastor and as a minister and all kinds of ministerial things, we do what we know to do. And we maintain the boundaries, and we, to the extent that we can, maintain the order in the home, but we have to leave it there. And there is a parable in Mark, the 4th chapter. It's very powerful. It's about the sower planting a seed in the ground and leaving it there. He doesn't go back every day to see if it's working, if it's growing. He just leaves it there, and the ground produces the fruit ultimately over time. And we have learned in many countries, in many places, with many people, do what you know to do. And you, by so doing, you are planting seeds that ultimately will grow to something more than what they had. It's not a simple thing, but that's the truth, I believe.
Yeah, and I think too, Jason, a couple things is that if they can learn to not take things personally.
Yeah.
Josh Ship's video of his foster dad, he learned the art of not taking things personally, but staying emotionally connected to Josh. And that's an art. And the other thing is something I don't think we talk about in foster care, in that when foster parents have really rough, even scary kind of days, they don't have any opportunity to debrief with anybody. And so that stuff just accumulates. So I think if they had a system, even one other foster parent in a church that they could call and say, look, this happened today. This has made me feel this way. I need to just talk about it. We don't always need to have the answers on the other end, but just listening ear. So just the concept that we need to debrief as foster and adoptive parents sometimes.
And a lot of parents are kept in shame behind a veil because they believe falsely that if they share their problems with another, they'll be judged or something. When in reality, we're all going through the same thing. We need to know that.
Right. That's good.
By the way, Josh Schiff, that video. Have you seen that video, Jason?
Yes, sir. And we'll find it and we'll link in the comments so that anyone who's watching can see it as well.
But my guess is that Josh Schiff's foster parents said to themselves and to each other probably, this isn't working, because Josh Schiff's behavior just spun and spun and spun. Exactly. But there was a moment in time when the seeds began to grow. So be encouraged.
Yes, in fact, they did. If you look at they have a second video, you've probably seen, Jason, of the rest of the story. And they do talk about those moments. They just about had it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's good. So for all the foster and adoptive parents out there who say, I've gone through trauma training and I know the techniques and I try to connect, and sometimes it just feels like I get punched in the face for it. Keep planting the seed and keep planting the seed. And, I find that even begins to shift, going back to that question about reframing the way that we think about some things and expectations. One of the expectations being a certain definition of what success is. And that's mostly built around the world's definition of success often, which is you produce positive outcomes all the time. You grow, you rise in the power ranks, you climb the ladder, you pad your bank account, you live in, right? Your success is determined on outcomes you can produce. And I think what we're saying here is, of course, we're going to work towards the best possible outcomes, but success right here in the moment is keep planting the seed and be faithful in that, and trust
Be a
God.
part of the community. Yeah. Let me share something with you, Jason, that is so powerful to me. It's a quote by Dallas Willard, and he said, "Life is not about what we can achieve; it's about what we become, the person that we become." So we might try to achieve certain things with these children, but our main thrust is, what will these kids become? That's the main thing. And that's true for all of us, really.
And our son, who we adopted at 16, is now 54. And we are still planting seeds. We are still doing the things that we wish we would have known years and years and years ago. But there is still the consequences of probably 9 ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and physically, emotionally, but he's doing the best he can. We remind ourselves he's doing the best he can.
Right.
That's good. So let me end with this. As I mentioned earlier, you're currently working on a new book, Mending the Broken Road, Creating Trauma-Informed Children and Youth Ministries. Can you tell us, why did you feel the need to write this book?
It started with, I was serving, and I'll do this quickly. I was subbing one morning in a children's ministry program, and 2 little boys came in. I could tell they were a little bit off the wall. And I had just been introduced to the work of Karen Purvis. And it wasn't very long before these boys were kicked out of the Sunday school. And I said, there has to be a better way. So that began my looking at the fact that our churches are not trauma informed. They're about behavior. You get a warning, then you get a second warning, and then we call your parents. There's no learning how to deal with the behavior and connect with the kids. And the churches should be the best place for that happening. In the research for the book, we are finding literally all over the country, there are very few trauma-informed children or youth ministries. There's small pockets, maybe, but the need is huge as we see it.
I think it might have been you, Jason. I asked somebody, perhaps you, last time we talked, is there any Sunday school curriculum that's trauma-informed? You know what typical curriculum is in Sunday schools, but is it trauma-informed, helping the teachers understand the behavior of a child? As we often say, what we do not talk out,
We act out, or there's always meaning behind behavior.
meaning behind the behavior. That's just understanding.
Right.
and I'm going to teach a course on healthy pastor, healthy churches. And pastors need to realize that the people in their church are acting in a way that demonstrates where they've been, what's happened to them.
Right.
And
That's
so
good. So who is the book written for? I think that's obvious, but I'll have you just clarify. And then second, what can they expect from the book? What will they walk away with? What will they be able to hold on to as a result of reading the book?
Well, our target is children and youth pastors, but we hope that this moves into the whole DNA of the church.
Sure.
And so that's the target audience, and they'll be able to walk away with an understanding of the impact of trauma, tools and strategies on how to create an environment of felt safety in more ways than we've talked about in TBRI materials, ways to build connection that are practical strategies, and actually even ways how to correct kids in a Sunday school environment that's not going to escalate into something. And one of the things that we're really learning, and it happened actually even yesterday, we're going to talk to children, youth pastors on how to hear hard stories. That happened yesterday. The pastor's wife where we are, she's hearing hard stories and didn't know what to do with them. And so we're going to talk about hearing hard stories.
That's good.
Self-care, and we're going to do an adult chapter too, right? Yeah.
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 Awesome. So when will we see it? I know that's probably the elusive question. You would probably like to say yesterday, but is there any kind of timeline that we can anticipate having this available in our hands?
Well, our deadline is July. Publication date is October 2022. Oh, which is so far away. But I'm hoping that Focus on the Family will allow us to start dropping little pebbles out along the way.
Yeah.
So we hope so.
Yeah. Awesome. Fantastic.
it's also quite timely, Jason, as you well know. Our kids we're living in a culture right now in a society where trauma is going on, abuse is going on, the isolation, all that stuff. And when they come out, and they will be coming out with a whole lot of wounds and hurts and things. And churches need to be ready. I think this is the time for the church to rise up and do the work that God has called us to do. And I think this will include trauma.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Jane and David, we have a mutual friend in Kim Bato, and I know I've heard her say it. I've heard you say it as well. The church leader, the children's pastor, the student ministry leader asks, when is the right time for us as a children and student ministry or as a church to be thinking about this? I don't know if we have any kids in foster care or that were adopted in our ministry. When's the right time? And I love the answer to this. What would you say to them?
They're there every day. There are kids coming out of divorce homes who've been bullied at school, who maybe sibling conflicts. There's kids that come with traumatic events every Sunday.
Even though they may be coming from a good zip code and the parents seem to be intact and everything's going well on the outside, but below the surface, oftentimes there's incredible wounds.
They're there.
Yeah.
And so this is broader than just the foster care and adoption community.
Absolutely.
100%.
Yes.
And I've heard Kim say she'll get asked, how do we know when we need to start doing this in our church? And she'll say, if you have a room with a few kids in it, then you've got trauma.
You've got trauma. It's time.
Statistically, it's time now. Yeah. So, well, fantastic. I truly do appreciate you spending some time and sharing your heart and a little bit of your story. And I know that so many have been encouraged by your work. We're definitely excited about this new work that you are producing now. And October 2022 can't come fast enough for many of us. But in the meantime, how can we find you? How can we lean into some more resources that you have available to really encourage families on their journey now?
Well, you can visit our Community Impact Center website, DaytonCIC.com. We are loading it with lots of resources for foster and adoptive parents. We have a whole section just for foster and adoptive parents that we're building on articles and that were originally published in Focus on the Family, lots of other resources. So that's a great place to find us.
And there's some articles on there by Ruby Johnson that you know, I'm sure. and about kids in this present time,
COVID time. right.
COVID time, and they're very helpful and they're there. And of
Good.
course, we're available. We show up every day, so if we can be of help, let us know.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, we'll definitely be sure to link to that in the comments as well, so people have access to that. And again, we're so grateful for your ministry, your legacy that you are leaving, not only in your family and in your community, but in families literally all around the world. And so, thank you again.
Appreciate it,
Thanks,
Jason. Thank
Jason.
you.
Blessings.
Yeah.